All opinions expressed on this episode belong purely to the speaker and do not necessarily represent the opinions of any Jonathans that normally host this show.
As you know, this is the measure of an episode where it is our continuing mission to explore what makes Star Trek genuine Star Trek and not just a Guardians of the Galaxy movie. I'm Paul.
And I'm Jonathan.
And the criteria by which we judge these episodes, number one, is there science fiction explored in the plot? Number two, is that science fiction unique or novel in some way? And number three, is there a moral or ethical dilemma explored in the episode? And this week, we watched Strange New Worlds, Season 1, Episode 7, The Serene Squall, which once again sounds very much, Jonathan, I don't know how much you've seen the original series. I know you've seen one, at least
I've
one.
seen quite a bit more than that.
Right.
Yeah, no, this is continuing with their tradition of making episode titles sound like the classic series.
Exactly, yeah. And the blurb is, while on a dangerous humanitarian mission, the crew of the USS Enterprise stumbles into a harrowing game of leverage with the quadrant's deadliest space pirate. So I have to say something about this. So Angel, aka Dr. Aspen, she's sort of she flips. Spoiler alert. She flips, and she turns into a very fabulous mustache twirling bad guy. And
jumping right into that spoiler.
Yeah. Well, it's very important because I know that you, Jonathan, are very much a Marvel fan, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm curious if you also had the experience of like feeling like it felt in tone, not so much in content, whether it was good or bad is, that aside, but just in tone, it felt like a Guardians movie. Did you have the same experience?
You say in tone, and that's interesting. It feels like, because, the problem is that James Gunn has such a distinctive voice in his creative content that, no, that wasn't something that immediately leapt out at me. But I could say that, like, I definitely see how this could have been, because James Gunn almost didn't direct Guardians 3. Like, this could have been someone else's content that was like a spin-off of Guardians that James Gunn didn't have any hand with. I totally see how this is parallel to it for sure.
I felt like the tone of the comedy where it doesn't quite feel like for example, the Captain Pike, when they're being held prisoner on the Serene Squall, the ship, he never quite feels like he's in danger, and nobody else does either. They all kind of are just taking it very casually. And it felt very Star-Lord to me. It felt very, no one's taking this very seriously, except the part where Dr. Aspen is setting us up that this is the most dangerous ship, the most dangerous pirate ship in the quadrant, or whatever you want to say. And there are several times, at least 3 times, where she warns us that, hey, if this were the Serene Squall, we'd all be dead by now, that kind of stuff. And so it's very ominous sounding until we meet them. And it's a fat blue guy with long hair that doesn't like people's cooking. And, it's like,
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like there's this weird, I'm having trouble reconciling those two things. And that's where that Guardians kind of thing hit me. And it kind of felt like, because, with Marvel, what always kind of impressed me about Marvel was that they're able to very well balance the earnest danger stakes part of his plot and it never gets too heavy side of a plot, right? It never gets to the point.
Paul, you can't do this to me. You cannot start talking about Marvel because I've got some opinions on that very thing that you're talking about right now.
Oh, well, let's hear them, Jonathan.
Well, okay, so Thor Ragnarok is, I think, the worst offender when it comes to this. It's a fun movie. I enjoy it overall. But at the very end, spoilers for a movie that's not the subject of this episode. So Asgard gets destroyed. I mean, that's, Ragnarok is what that is even referring to. And at when it's destroyed, they're looking out at it and they have Korg basically saying, his jokes and everything. And that's just absolutely the wrong time for it, because in universe, Thor is over 1,000 years old. This has been his home. These have been his people. He's watching like his kingdom effectively, like he's royalty here, be destroyed. And that is a moment that really should not have been played for comedy. That really should have been something that like you felt Thor and his loss in that moment, because it definitely would have been loss. And so, mostly I would say that I agree with you, but I think that more recently They've been sort of leaning a little bit too heavily into the comedy side of things, and I think it's actually kind of easy to blame Guardians of the Galaxy because that brought along with it a new tone that deviated quite a bit from the original tone benchmark, which was the first Iron Man movie. And it was successful. It did very well, and so they shifted a bit to sort of make everything a little bit more like that.
I think the first three iterations of Thor in the Marvel movies, which was Thor 1, Thor 2, and Avengers, I think you had that Thor. You kind of had a very unhumorous, and that he's very stoic, and you get the sense that this person could be 1,000 years old. Uh, and I think that, as you said, in Ragnarok, that was abandoned, and they kind of wrote a new Thor in a way.
Yeah.
Like it really could, if you really juxtapose the first Thor character with Ragnarok Thor, they're two separate characters.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, I don't mind them trying to make him funnier. I totally get the impulse to do that. But your word, abandoned, is correct. And I think that was the mistake, that they swung way too hard in the other direction.
And that's why the Enterprise...
But no, yeah, actually, to tie that back into the conversation you're having, you're not wrong. I didn't notice this in the moment, but the stakes are told, not shown. Like we're told that it's important, but then no one acts as if it's important.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's okay for us to have the Dr. Aspen tell us that, set up this ominous thing that's lurking in the darkness, right? So that's okay, except when they finally beam over there, and they are kind of outfitted for battle. They're outfitted for something bad to happen, and that's the part where it kind of goes awry for me in terms of the tone, because then it's like, well, there's nobody here, and then it's all then it turns into Waterworld meets Guardians of the Galaxy, where there's all these people who seem to be living off of junk or something. Like, I guess it's supposed to be space pirates. And in terms of space pirates, I'm immediately reminded of Firefly. Did you ever see
Reavers?
Jonathan? Have you ever seen Yes, Reavers, exactly. Which is a way darker, way scarier, way more ominous group of people than this was. But it's funny that you join us, Jonathan, on this episode, because every episode before this one does not have this weird incongruity of tone. It kind of lands where it needs to land. Like you're okay with all of because there is a lot of, it is very lighthearted at times. It actually is setting us up for the original series very well. And you've not seen, Jonathan, the previous 6 episodes.
I don't know what you're talking about, Paul. I have seen all the same episodes that you have, of course.
Right. So then you do remember that it does go back and forth really well between when it's supposed to be lighthearted and funny, and there's an amount of levity, versus when the shit has hit the fan and things are bad and there is danger. So that doesn't really happen in this episode. I mean, the only moment I can think of is when they storm the bridge, when the bad guys storm the Enterprise bridge. And that actually did feel like there was something bad could happen. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah. And I'll say too, just thinking about like the overall tone, and I guess comparing it to Guardians of the Galaxy, but like there was something about Pike's demeanor that felt very much like the Doctor, like Doctor Who, where it's like he knows so much about the situation. He doesn't feel like he's in over his head ever. He's always got total control. And yeah, like you're not wrong. I mean, like the bridge is basically the only time that it really felt like people acting like the stakes were real.
Right. Yeah. So what the difference between this show and all the other Star Trek shows, it seems, is stoicism on the bridge. Everybody's jokey on the bridge, and that doesn't ever really happen that often in the other shows. It's usually quite serious on the bridges, all the other bridges. And I don't know. So when you say Doctor Who, you have to keep in mind, I have never seen a single frame of Doctor Who. I mean, I know what a Dalek is from Epic Rock Battles. I know what that means. That's my only input.
Cultural touchstone.
Doctor Who. Yeah. So I'm up to date. That's what I'm trying to say. Like, I know exactly what you meant when you said Doctor Who. Is the Doctor very jokey and lighthearted, or is it the other thing? Other way around?
Doctor Who is a kid's show at its heart. And so there's consequence to the things that happen, and the Doctor does take things seriously. But yes, there's this levity that goes throughout because he basically has to be smiling to the kids that are watching. Um, and so, nothing ever feels like it's too much for the Doctor. He's the universe's hero.
Got it. There's nothing he hasn't seen, type of thing.
That's close enough to, yeah, and I'll take that.
Okay.
So I don't like the way that Vulcans in general were treated in this episode. And then that's going to be absolutely consistent with opinions I've expressed in prior episodes as well. But it's like when they say that Vulcans, get rid of emotion and they deal with pure logic and everything, the way that that's expressed is that they go through all the emotional stuff inside, and they only show sort of the stoic demeanor. And that's a real problem because that's not the same thing. That's not having emotions. That's right. like with this in the whole sort of just the intro. Let's get to the actual episode. Right. When Spock is talking to his girlfriend and he's clearly uncomfortable, and then she says that I thought that the onus was on me to be the one who researches you because I don't understand the human side of things as well as you. He says, "Thank you." Gratitude is an emotion. Like that's to begin with, that's just already a problem. Right. Then with his discomfort with that is kind of also emotional. And then when he's explaining this thing to his friend and she says, calls him out for being distracted, he says sorry. Remorse is an emotion. And so it's just like, I don't even know what being emotionless means in the context of all this, because the writers are making that very unclear. He's just someone who's basically autistic in his expression of emotions.
Yes, I agree with you. I think throughout all of Star Trek, the entire Star Trek canon, that's always been a complaint, because it's very difficult to have a being who doesn't express emotions, especially with the revelation that in fact they do have emotions, they're just repressing them. And they're trying and they're actually their entire culture is centered around repressing your emotions because they feel that it goes badly otherwise. And I feel like what they're doing well in this show is they're stepping outside of that circle of we're not going to talk about that because it doesn't make any sense, as you just pointed out. They're kind of showing that, we've never seen two Vulcans be betrothed before, and what that's like to be with two people who are, I guess, in love with each other, even though love is a pretty strong emotion. So I feel like they're kind of handling that by showing that all Vulcans are a work in progress in terms of repressing their emotions and letting go whichever emotion they think is either overflow or is necessary.
But they did it very successfully with Data. Like Data, I think, is actually a pretty good example of someone who doesn't really feel emotions, that he really does kind of approach things logically. He'll get confused, he'll do his best to kind of reconcile conflicting pieces of information, but he doesn't seem to feel one way or another about things that happen.
It is true. I always wonder why everybody likes Data. I feel like on the surface, it is because he's a robot and maybe a bit of a puppy. Everybody he's kind of innocent in that way because he doesn't understand emotions, and he's always trying to wrap his
famously
his
you and I have talked
it.
about this on the show a lot.
Yes, a lot. And I'm glad you remember. And I feel like Data is different because he's trying to emulate emotion. He's trying to be human. And it's sort of the opposite of Vulcans, which are very much trying to not be human. They're trying to be the opposite. They're trying to be Data, basically, without the striving to be human. And I'm glad in a way that they're exploring that in the show, but at the same time, every scene that we have with this Vulcan, with both Vulcans that are on the show, because T'Pring is on the show quite a bit, even though she's kind of not on the ship, and they both show plenty of emotions, like run the gamut, So I don't know where they're going with that, other than we like to do a lot of work on the show in terms of being apologists, and I think that maybe they're trying to show that maybe all Vulcans aren't these perfect unemotional people, that they are in fact emotional all the time. I know that there's probably someone much more versed in Star Trek than I am, that there has been a history written about Vulcans where they were terribly violent in the past. Like, it was not a society, it was kind of just barbarism, and they decided that was bad, that emotions caused that, and so they vowed to release all emotion from their society, and now we're here. And so I think that's kind of a rough outline of how that came to be. But you're totally right, is what I'm trying to say. It doesn't make any sense because, as you said, gratitude is an emotion.
Remorse.
All the things, remorse, all the things that happen in the show to Spock are because of emotion, right? I will say, though, I feel like it makes them better characters.
Having the emotions?
Or I guess at least having emotions they don't want, which is, I guess, a very human part of the human condition. Like, I don't want to be sad. In a more broader stroke, I want to ask, did you like this episode?
I mean, it was a good time. It's well made. I don't know. I mean, it's tough because, like, and you really shine a spotlight on it, but like, because they didn't really act like there were any consequences, it just kind of felt like they were going through emotions. I don't know. It wasn't particularly engaging. Like, it was fine.
Yeah.
But that's it. It was fine.
Right. I agree with you. It's kind of too bad. I hope that the next episodes recover from this. So there's the inciting incident where they are forced to make a decision to go outside of the realm of Federation space and to go rescue this colonial ship.
Yeah.
And they show up to this debris field, which I guess they're able to tell is the remnants of this colonial armada or whatever it is. And they go from, that's the only information they know, which is, okay, a ship was destroyed here. And they are able to logic their way into, okay, all of the colonists, all of the colonists are going to be sold into slavery if we don't go rescue them. That was like 30 seconds of them speculating. And so they decide to risk the life of the crew, and based on pure speculation.
Yeah.
Because somebody said, well, sometimes I've heard that slavery is a thing. So.
Yeah. Or, it'd be funny if there was, like, or it could be dogfighting. They could be dogfighting down there.
It could be anything. You're right. It could be some terrible thing. This happened later. Like, when another logistical problem was when the Enterprise encounters the colonist ship after they've been going out of the Federation space. Mm-hmm. And there's this kind of grand reveal when the asteroid kind of moves out of the way and there's the ship in the background. And they're like a couple football fields away, or they're in viewing distance. And part of the reason that they're able to hide, I guess, the Enterprise is because they say that the other ship's sensors haven't detected us yet. And I felt like that's so lazy. That's so not what would happen. I'm pretty sure the sensors of a spaceship can see farther than a couple of football fields. It seems like it wouldn't be very easy to travel through space if you couldn't see that far away. So it just felt very chintzy. And normally it doesn't do that, but it didn't make any sense. And then they beam onto the ship and they don't know that anybody's there until they zip line down from the rafters.
Well, and I have some questions. So the sensors haven't detected them yet. I mean, kind of to your point, but like, then what are they for? Like, if they have sensors that can't detect ships that distance, then that's weird. Like, and those seem like useless sensors.
Right.
Also, how can they tell? Like, if I had a car that could detect other cars, like there are Teslas that can do this, that doesn't announce anything to the cars that I'm detecting.
Yeah, there is a long-running methodology in Star Trek Shield's tech where you can tell if you're being scanned. So I don't know how you would know that, but
is scanning the same thing as detecting? Like, if the sensors just simply detect that a ship is there, that's not the same thing as a scan. Like, sure, a scan is going to be a process that's going to tell with more detail through various metrics for sending signals and receiving them back and all that kind of stuff. Sure, like a scan will give you more information, but like, if you have cameras there that are simply looking into space and they see a spaceship, then there's nothing on the other spaceship that it's seeing to let them know that, oh, yep, we saw you. Like, the Heisenberg uncertainty principle is not going to be detectable.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that the difference is that when you scan somebody, you're reaching much deeper into in terms of data and information, as opposed to like, oh, there's this thing that just showed up. What do you
You
want to do
gotta
about
say
it?
data. When you're talking about the item and not the person, you gotta say data. You said reaching into data, and I'm like really upset by that
Oh,
image.
I actually meant data. Yeah, I had moved on. So sorry. I'll make that clearer next time. Yeah, I don't know. I felt like they were very focused on the comedy of this episode and introducing this angel, or AKA Dr. Aspen. And I felt like that was the focus, and that was where they put all of their writing energy into, and not the logistics of the away team and the science and the technology, etc. I don't think that they really cared about that in this episode. Really,
Yeah.
I mean, so what did you think of the flip when Dr. Aspen becomes Angel?
I found it really predictable. Like whenever they have a person on the show
Yeah,
who is so it's a trope. I mean, the person who on the show who's like a ridiculously good guy, better good guy than the good guys, because like she even says that she left the Federation to help people because the Federation wasn't doing enough. Like that's the bad guy. Like you can tell.
right. The more you're asking yourself, why aren't they on the ship? Then you know that something is going to happen. Either they're going to die or they're going to flip in some way. Something's going to happen to them.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
what I didn't like about it was, she was perfectly fine when she was being Dr. Aspen. Fine. Like I liked it. I liked that she was kind of psychoanalyzing Spock in a way that was actually made a lot of sense considering the very ending of this, which we can get into in a second. But what I didn't understand was why they made Angel this kind of smug, quippy, to the point of being annoying character, where she was this, I don't know a better way to say this, but a mustache twirling villain.
Yeah.
And like I say, villain, like comic book villain. Like she looked like one, she talked like one, she was dressed like one. It felt very much that way. And so I found it just annoying. I don't know who she was being. Like usually when you're that way to somebody has wronged you, and she wasn't really even wronged by the Federation. At least in the backstory that we got about her, and she just
Yeah.
turns into kind of just I don't know, just a terrible person, and I don't really know why. Did anything pop out at you?
No. It didn't strike me at the time when I was watching it, but I mean, again, you're not wrong. Like thinking back on it, it's weird that the gear change was that potent. That's a bad sentence.
We love bad sentences on this podcast. It's what sets us apart
What the
from
heck,
everybody
Paul?
else.
What is a potent gear change?
I'm thinking like thick with oil. That's the visual I get. I don't know why she had to be so angry at everybody. Why she was like, "Oh, well, why don't you go over there?" Like, what? Why did it turn into Ace Ventura type of
Yeah.
characterization?
But she also like she says things that are just flat wrong. Like when she's talking to Spock before the reveal, she's saying that they're talking about him being both human and Vulcan, and he says that's just biology. I was raised on Vulcan, and she goes that's just geography. I'm like, no, that's the culture he was raised in. It's not just about where he was. That's certainly going to help influence the culture, but like, yes, his biology is way less important than the culture that he's raised in. That's not the same thing as just geography. Um,
Right.
and then also later on when she's like, I've been manipulating your emotions this whole time. Not necessarily. Like he could learn about this and he could determine that it's more logical to do the things that's going to help the most people. That doesn't have to be tugging on heartstrings. It could just be like, no, I mean, logically, these people should be helped because that's the most beneficial for the overall outcome.
Right. Yeah, and she was less tugging at heartstrings as she was just lying. She was
Right?
just lying to people.
Oh,
And
that too. She said that
yeah,
like Vulcans don't lie, and like there at the end, their whole gambit is a deception. So Vulcans do lie.
right. So I think the reason that they were doing this was are trying to establish this love triangle I mean, I don't know if you caught on to that, but there's
Yeah.
been a few other instances where
Yeah, you got
nurse,
that right.
yeah, the nurse. What's her goddamn name? I can never remember her name. Nurse. Nope, it's not
I
gonna
know it.
come.
I'm just
The
seeing if
nurse.
you guess.
Thanks. What is it?
I don't know.
Aha! The nurse. There's been a couple of other instances where she and Spock, like she kind of catches a glance or whatever, or rather he catches a glance from her, and it's kind of like, oh, a little thing. And that's the one thing I actually appreciated about this episode is without ever having that conversation between the nurse and Chapel. There we go. Nailed it. Nurse Chapel and Spock, where they're saying, you know, I thought there was something, but he's like, well, look, I have this relationship with the Pring and I can't do, like, they don't ever have that conversation. I'm so happy they didn't. They didn't really need to. And
Hmm.
that's one thing that they're actually pretty good at on this show is not beating us over the head with character stuff. That they kind of let it go, and if you catch it, you catch it. If you don't, well, too bad. You know, they have a little bit less contempt. Well, a great deal less contempt for the audience than in Picard, where in Picard they do, like, not only do they spell it out for you in dialogue, but they underscore it with huge music swells to make
Hmm.
sure that you know it's important. So I like that. But I did like that there's this triangle, and they have this whole thing where T'Pring and Spock are obviously their betrothed, but there's this other thing now because I think the idea between the kiss between Nurse Chapel and Spock was that, oh, that seemed like there was more there. You know, it
Yeah.
seemed like it wasn't just pretend.
Yeah. And you know, the obvious thing is that this is going to be something that builds. I don't know if I would prefer the obvious thing or if I'd like them to subvert that. If they do subvert it, I don't want them to just drop it. I don't know. It's tough being a writer because you got to like find ways to keep things interesting without straying too far away from the language of the media that's already been established.
Right.
Um,
And I don't know what the future is between Nurse Chapel and Spock are, for example, in the next, not the next generation, the original series. I don't actually know if they ever do have any kind of romantic relationship.
yeah,
And so I don't know if they're seeding that or if they're just playing around, if they're just fooling around with something. I don't know.
I don't know.
I think, yeah, I don't know either. But that was the really only thing that jumped out at me as interesting, was that they were saying a lot without saying anything, and I appreciate it.
And something that I of course know because I've seen the whole show, but you could perhaps
Right.
remind the audience. Um, the thing that really struck me when watching this is just how animated other characters are when interacting with Spock. And I don't know if this is like a character choice that everybody's making, if it's something that the director is specifically asking people to do, but it really feels like they're trying to force a contrast between Spock's emotionless nature and all like the really sort of lively communication methods that a lot of people have. Like everyone's just like way like they turn it up when engaging with Spock because he's so level.
Right. Always get the impression that they're hazing Spock. That everyone is
Yeah,
right.
yeah, that's
Like
actually a really good way of putting it. It seems like they're performative, like they're clued in on something that Spock is being deliberately left out of the loop on.
or they're trying to annoy him by overloading him with emotional stimulus, right? Because I
Mm.
feel like the state of, I guess, character. I don't want to say emotion because he's not supposed to have any, but the state of which they put Spock is always kind of uncomfortably annoyed at his situation by having to deal with humans and all of their emotion, and so everybody's kind of dialing it up whenever they walk around him. That's kind of is what it feels like to me, and
um,
I'm actually okay with it.
I don't know if I get that sense. I'm just thinking about it, and I mean, I don't know. I get how not expressing emotions, just sort of constantly being a baseline sort of expression, could read as being annoyed to people who aren't used to that. But I don't know if that's intentional. I don't think that Spock is meant to come off as being annoyed by other people.
We've talked about this before. You might remember where it seems like Vulcans are kind of inherently arrogant
Yeah.
and superior feeling because they feel as though that they have graduated to a higher level of enlightenment because they have shed their primitive emotions. And I don't know if this particular Spock feels that way. I do get that he feels more isolated because he's not around his kind, and that he feels torn because he is part human, and that there's always this dichotomy of emotion, even more so than with Leonard Nimoy's Spock, where you got the sense that it's kind of hard to use him as to analyze him, because he was just sort of setting the tone of what a Vulcan is, because he was the first one. I get the sense that they're playing Spock a little bit lighter in terms of making fun of the fact that he's not supposed to have emotions. Like they're playing it less as though it's something sacred. It's kind of like not making fun of someone's religion in front of them. They drop that. they are very much making fun of him, I guess, not making fun overtly, but they're not taking it as heavily as it has been in the past in terms of the way Vulcans present themselves. Did you?
Yeah.
So you've seen Leonard Nimoy's Spock. You've probably seen other Vulcans, having seen a lot of the show.
Yeah.
So how do you like this particular expression of Spock or a Vulcan?
Well, yeah, and I was actually just going to say something about that next, because I think in talking about how they suppress emotions and comparing it to Data and actual sort of emotionless, I don't know, people and that kind of stuff. I think that Leonard Nimoy's Spock is actually much more like that. Much more emotions are kind of secondary. Leonard Nimoy always seems curious by emotions. Like he thinks it's interesting that other people feel things and he doesn't. So
Right.
that's a bit incongruous if we're talking about this as being a younger version of Spock. But that aside, I think it makes sense that a younger Spock, which is what we're seeing here, would have he'd be sort of imperfect at that process of being emotionless. It's still a journey that he's on. So
Right. Right.
I'm certainly willing to forgive the not exactly failings, but the fact that he's not emotionless.
Right.
Because
Right.
the character in continuity does get there.
Right. And I think that what people liked about Leonard Nimoy's Spock, or being a Vulcan, was that he wasn't being a robot. He wasn't being robotic. It did feel like there was some sort of person behind
Yeah.
that. And that's probably a tribute to Leonard Nimoy's acting, because he was a pretty good actor. I don't know if I've ever seen him being anything else than Star Trek. Actually, I can tell you I haven't. So I have no idea in terms of him being. He's just really good at being Spock. Let's put it that way. So everybody's kind of doing an impression of Spock in the latter shows, and so that's tough to try and do that. It's kind of the same thing as when, for example, Seth MacFarlane goes on a talk show, and they say, "Come on, do your characters, do the characters. We love the characters." And so he does the characters. You're like, "Oh man, he's so good at that." When in reality, well, he made up the voice, right? So he's not really
Right.
doing it. He's not doing an impression. He's doing what he does, like something he made up, So it's easier for him to get off in that way. Anyway, I think this guy's doing a pretty good job. At a certain point, we kind of just have to forget that he becomes Leonard Nimoy in 20 years or however long, whatever it is, and that this is just a new show. This is just a show with a new Vulcan who happens to be named Spock, and that's it, right? They don't think about, like, people get pissed because they're like, well, it doesn't seem anything like Spock to me. It's like, well, come on. Right? That was how many years ago? How many years ago was that? 60 years? 1968?
Yeah. I don't know that I agree with that.
Yeah, let's get into it. Hit me.
Because we are talking about Star Trek, which is one of the very few things that kind of has the status that it does. And Spock is, we're talking about an iconic character on an iconic show. And so doing an impression of the person that basically established this character to begin with is correct, I would say. Like it's established, deviating too far from that, it becomes something that is effectively unrecognizable, even if it's slightly. Like there's still an accurate version of this thing that you're intended to portray. I get wanting, and this sort of goes back to what I was saying, like it makes sense that he would be sort of a more imperfect version of it, being younger. Starting from the Leonard Nimoy character and then working way backwards and figuring out who this person would have been in in the timeline at this point in his past.
Right.
And within that, as an actor, I certainly understand the impulse of wanting to put your own spin on it, like you want to make it yours, but there is still a benchmark and you can't ignore that.
I agree with you that there is a benchmark and that you do have to stay within the bounds of what eventually Spock is supposed to be. But I do think that there's only so much fidelity one can have in a show that is not taking place, but is being produced 60 years after the original. It's the same argument that you and I have had many times about should the Enterprise resemble the Enterprise as it did in the original series.
Mm-hmm.
And if anything, it is a complete polar opposite of what the Enterprise looked like in the 1960s. And I understand why you just can't do that. And I understand why a lot of people, maybe a bit of myself included, don't like the original series a lot because it feels so dated.
Yeah,
Not so much, not even in the sets and whatever, but also just in the acting style and the
sure.
types of storylines. So how much then, I ask you, how much fidelity is required to be considered good or correct when the show took place or was made 60 years ago or something like that? 60? Yeah,
Well,
60 years ago.
so we're talking about a couple of different things there though, because when you have a character, then there are certain things that you can distill that have nothing to do necessarily with the the cinematography and the sound design and even the actor portraying them. Like there's still things about Spock that are necessary to be there in order for it to be recognizably Spock at all. And that goes back to what I was saying, like where it's just at a certain point it's
Right.
just a different character, and that's not why you're watching the show. Um,
Right.
the analogy that I'll give is that it's like if there was a game that released on the PlayStation and they wanted to like remaster it and basically develop the game from the ground up for today's console, you would have all of the updated visuals, more polygons, better textures, better sound, better cinematography. You could do motion capture. Like you'd have different tools at your disposal, but it should still be something that feels like the same game to you. And yeah, that's where I stand. Like updating
Okay.
everything to sort of conform with the times is different, I think, from straying from the things that made them recognizably, you know, the thing that attracted to you in the first place.
And that's another thing that I actually like. I feel like they are doing well on this show is you can watch this show and get the reminiscence of the original series without
Yeah,
it looking like it. I think that you can kind of feel it, right? I don't know
yeah,
if you noticed, but the ship is magnificent. Like I don't know of another way to say it, but it just is. It's just amazing. It makes me want to be there. Like I want to be there even more
yeah,
than Next Gen, right? Next Gen was kind of like I want to be in that universe. I want to live there, and this was even more so. Like it's just amazing,
yeah,
and I never felt that way with the original series. I always felt like I was on a submarine, and so I guess that's where it diverges in that sense, where it feels like the future. And I don't know. I would love to be able to go and interview people from the '60s after having watched a season of the original series and say, does this feel like the future to you, or does it feel like they're just kind of telling you it's the future and that's you have to accept that because that's the show? Like do you feel like this is what's going to happen in 200, 300 years? I mean, do you actually, I should ask, do you feel that way when you watch the show? Does it feel like the future?
um
A plausible future, I should say.
so sorry, so Strange New Worlds or the original series?
Strange New Worlds.
So Strange New Worlds, yeah, yeah. There's definitely a more. I mean, but I feel like it just comes down to the production values. Like it definitely feels more like the future than the original series did. But comparing
Right.
them, it's like the original series. If the original series were to be recreated perfectly today, then we're talking about basically like a public access TV show or like a community theater presentation of Star Trek,
Right.
because that's where the production values were at the time. And so if you want to compare the two things, it's just it becomes virtually impossible because you have to make so many concessions just because of the time frames we're talking about.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know. I feel like there have probably been a lot of people who don't like. So on Amazon, I should say that out of 5 stars, Strange New Worlds only has 4, and there's like 1,000 reviews or something like that, which seems low for a show like this. Maybe on Paramount Plus it's different,
I mean,
but
this was a 4-star episode.
yeah, I agree. I mean, I think in terms of the whole show, though, it's very strange to me. Like, I would love to know what the complaint. Maybe I should go in. Maybe we'll have an episode where we go in and read the bad reviews, and that could be interesting. Oh, that's a good idea. What a great idea you just had.
Yeah, and I, Jonathan, demand that we do that.
Yeah. Do we think that this is a genuine Star Trek episode?
Not at all.
Not at all. Yeah. Okay. I agree with you.
It was a good time. I think it's a bit of a stretch to say that there was an ethical dilemma. I'm not thinking of one. Like, there was peril that was expressed, but like no real difficult choices. And there was, right. I mean, I'm struggling to think of any sci-fi, let alone anything that was critical to the plot.
There was nothing. So yeah, I agree. It didn't hit any of the criteria, very interestingly, as you just said. Yeah. So this is the first for this show. All the other episodes have been proper Star Trek. So hopefully this is not a trend, because this is actually one of my, in terms of all the new Trek that I've seen over the past however many years, 5-6 years, this is my favorite new Trek show by far. Like, it seems to hit all the marks the best.
So is this what? So as I feel like dropping the facade.
Okay.
As someone who has at least heard every episode, you don't seem to be that much of a fan of Star Trek in general. You like Next Generation mostly. This show, is this better than Next Generation for you?
I think it's different. I like it. To me, it's the best continuation of Next Generation, which is interesting because it takes place before Next Generation. I feel like the world is better, and I feel inclined to defend myself. I agree with you that there is a lot of Star Trek that I don't like. DS9 for a lot of various reasons, but I will say that even though I don't like it, I still enjoy watching it for the most part. But I love the world. I just love the Star Trek world way more than I like, for example, the Star Wars world. I like its continuity. I like that there is a fidelity across all the shows, but not to the point of throwing the baby out with the bathwater too often. Yeah. Sometimes they do. But I enjoy living in the world, even if that means I kind of have to sit through some hokey plot lines or some hokey character moments. Like, that's kind of what I like about it. So even though I will admit that the episodes themselves are not that good, especially like even objectively, just bad writing. I mean, one of them, you were there with us, the TOS episode, the Something of the King. I just listened to it too. Well, I can't remember what the name of the episode was, but that was a terrible episode to the point of just not making it. Was just nonsensical, you know.
Yeah.
But it's okay. Like, I'm sure you must feel this way about some of the Doctor Who, the different Doctors Who, right? That
the various Doctors Who.
Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, there must be some that are better than others, right?
Doctors, not necessarily the seasons or episodes.
Not the Doctors, just the seasons. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly don't have the vitriol that a lot of the fan community has, but I mean, I more or less agree with the consensus about which sort of seasons and Doctors have been the best and worst and all that kind of stuff.
Maybe this is sacrilege to say out loud, but I feel like it's more fun to listen to somebody bitch about something than it is to listen to somebody praise something. Like, if you listen to a podcast where all they did was praise a show, I feel like it'd be boring for me, I guess. Maybe you would like that. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, no. And so, okay. Yeah, if there was a podcast that was just like fawning over Star Trek, it was like every single time it's just like, this was great and this was great and this was great, see you next time, then right. Yeah, no, that's boring. But at the same time, if going in the other direction, if someone's like, this sucked, this sucked, this sucked, see you next time, I think that's equally boring.
No, you're right. We like to nitpick on the show. And I think that we do it with love for the most part.
For sure.
Sometimes, yeah, not so much love, but hopefully people don't think that we're just shitting on it all the time, and it's like not fun.
115 episodes. Sometimes it feels like this is my third episode.
I can see how you would think that. I can definitely see how you would think that. I hope that we will continue to watch the show. Specifically, you, Jonathan, will continue to watch the show.
Yeah, I'll get there eventually.
Yeah, I'm sure. I think you only have 300 and something before this episode.
Yeah.
But, you got time. It's not going anywhere. Paramount Plus is really strong because I hear it's a great app and everybody loves it.
The smoothest experience.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. Well, I guess that's been the show. And we normally have this other outro that we do that we don't do right now because we're doing our Strange New Worlds. By the way, if you liked Strange New Worlds, if you liked The Measure of an Episode, we don't just do New Trek, we do all the old classic Trek, the original series through Enterprise. And we do a couple, we've done Picard, we've done a couple of episodes of Lower Decks. So if you like it, we have, as we said, 115 episodes out there for you to listen to. Go leave a comment if you liked it. It would help us out tremendously. Jonathan, thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate it once again. It's been nice to have you as a host yet again.
Yeah. As always, it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. And I guess we'll see you next time. I've been Paul.
And I've been Jonathan.
I will let you off the hook because I started off, which means you're going to be doing an impression of somebody on the show. So I will give you the option to not do an impression just because.
So I'm going to do an impression. And I want you to see if you can guess which captain. Well, no, I won't say captain. Which person it is.
Okay. And this has been The Measure of an Episode.
But you already knew that. It's you, Paul.
Oh. Fair enough. I feel like I should have gotten that quicker, but fair enough.